Good evening, barflies and lounge lizards, and welcome to the Atomic Snack Bar. I'm your host, Mr. R. Sterling, and tonight we'll be discussing more sci-fi robots of the 1980s. This is the second part in the series, but they can be watched in any order. And much like the first episode, this list is about the robots themselves, not the films they appear in. And number 5 on the list is Rotor from 1987. Co-written and directed by Cullen Blaine, who is probably best known for his work in animation, Rotor is a sci-fi action film and the illegitimate love child of RoboCop and the first Terminator. And it tells the story of a rather unpleasant police scientist who thinks that putting raw meat-covered hands in his pockets is acceptable behavior. Said scientist is also working on a highly advanced police robot meant to combat the rise in crime. But after a switchblade comb accident, and no, I'm not kidding, the new police robot, known as Rotor, grows a skin suit and goes on a bit of a rampage, targeting some ne'er-do-wells on their way to IHOP. Rotor, which stands for Robotic Officer Tactical Operations Research, though that changes later in the movie, has 2 basic forms. His first form, which is why he's on this list, looks like the Terminator at a rave. Though if you've seen the film, you'd know that a rave probably wouldn't be the best place for him. Then his second form is that of a black leather-clad motorcycle cop with a pretty nice-looking mustache. Unfortunately, neither look like the awesome movie poster. As to who played Rotor, that is as odd as the film itself. The movie's credits list 3 different actors: Carol Brandon Baker, Brad Overturf, and Clark Moore. As to who did what, I have no idea. But my guess is that Baker was the main actor and the other 2 were stuntmen. This is the only acting role for both Baker and Moore. The effects in the film are credited to Bud Lewis and Elliot C. Hall. Lewis, who also co-wrote the film, was mostly a storyboard artist and worked on I Come in Peace, aka Dark Angel, and Class of 1999. Hall, who is credited for on-set effects, didn't do anything else of note that I could find. Rotor is a strange little movie, but if you dig stuff like Samurai Cop, which I do, this is definitely one to check out. And number 4 on the list are the robot spiders from Runaway from 1984. Written and directed by Michael Crichton, Runaway is a sci-fi action film that tells the true story of rock and roll star Gene Simmons. The popularity of Kiss had started to wane a bit. Folks were still weirded out by music from The Elder, and many had not forgiven them for I Was Made for Loving You, even though that's one of my favorite Kiss songs. Yeah, I said it. So things weren't going too well for the band. Whilst on set for the Lick It Up music video, Gene snapped and decided it was time for a new career. A career in evil. I mean, just look at him. You can tell that's exactly what he's thinking there. So he gets a haircut, builds a bunch of robot spiders, and decides to go head-to-head with Tom Selleck. And that's what we're here to talk about today, the robot spiders. These simple yet extremely effective little bots were probably the first time I ever found a robot scary. Doing evil Gene's bidding, these mechanical arachnids were assassin robots that injected their victims with acid. And it certainly doesn't help things that our hero in the film has a fear of heights and has to battle several of these little guys whilst in an acrophobic situation. And no, I don't know if that's actually a word or if I even used it correctly, and I don't care. Michael Crichton said that he wanted the robots in the film to be a bit more primitive looking, much closer to machines than humanoid androids that were popular at the time. And the robots of the film were designed by David Durand. Durand was a storyboard and conceptual artist who also worked on Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, Night of the Demons, and a gnome named Norm. And that's bang for your buck right there. I mean, where else are you going to find a reference to a gnome named Norm? And not only did he design the bots in Runaway, but he also did storyboard art. As far as the actual effects, there's a whole bunch of people credited, including director and effects artist George Ershbaumer, David Kelsey, and Alan Hall. Kelsey is a particular interest, for he worked on The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China, and one of my all-time favorite comedies, Airheads from 1994. And lastly, I wanted to mention the actual operators of the spider bots, Bill Hall, Rick Hall, and Robert Hall, none of whom were actually related, and that factoid was completely made up. And number 3 on the list is Spot from Eliminators from 1986. Directed by Peter Manoogian, Eliminators is a sci-fi action film and one of the best kitchen sink movies ever made. And it tells the story of the Mandroid, an awesome-looking cyborg created by a mad scientist who just happens to own a time machine. Even though this really isn't a time travel movie, the Mandroid eventually escapes and ends up teaming up with a lovable scoundrel, Tasha Yar before she joins Starfleet, and a ninja to stop the mad scientist from finally making good use of his time machine. That use being a trip back to ancient Rome in order to take over as the new Caesar. And along with our heroic Eliminators, we have Spot, an exceptionally charming looking little bot that is a nice merge of 1970s and 1980s styles. He kind of looks like Maximilian and Vincent from The Black Hole Had a Baby, kind of like in the director's cut of The Black Hole. And look at that, the first inappropriate pairing of the episode. Yeah, but you know what you're here for. As to Spot's design and construction, this is one with a ton of people credited for the effects as well, around 16 in all. But I feel it's an absolute must that I mention the great John Carl Buechler as the makeup designer and supervisor. I don't know if he had a thing to do with Spot, but it's John Carl Buechler, who I would consider the Paul Blaisdell of the 1980s. And I'm sure you fine folks in snack bar land know Buechler's work from films such as Cellar Dweller, Ghoulies, and the vastly underrated Troll, of which he also directed. Another possibility is Mitch Devane, who is credited with mechanical effects. Devane has an impressive resume as well, with work on From Beyond, Dolls, Ghoulies, and the aforementioned Troll. There's not a whole lot of information about Eliminators or Spot floating around, so I'll just end on the fact that this one predates RoboCop, of which has a similar setup for our lead. And on that, we should take a break.
Switch on Chargertron, robots like you've never seen. Switch on Chargertron, supersonic machines. Rev the meter till it's red. Launch out the tracker. Switch on Chargertron, now it's an attacker. Switch on Chargertron, always changing, rearranging. He's surprising. He's disguising. Chargertron.
Chargertron. There's Protagatron and Antagatron, each sold separately from Buddy L.
B5O. Come on, you guys. It's only a little. A hungry giant.
Hungry for a big honey taste.
Big taste, honeycomb, big taste.
Honeycomb taste. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not small.
No, no, no. Honeycomb's got a big honey taste. Big, big crunch or a big, big bite. Honeycomb cereal. Part of this big, complete breakfast. Honeycomb's a big, big bite. Yeah!
And we're back with number 2 on the list, and that's The Protectors from Chopping Mall from 1986. Directed by the great Jim Wynorski, Chopping Mall is a very misleadingly titled, almost creature feature, just with robots instead of creatures. And it tells the story of a really fancy mall that has clearly had enough with shoplifters. And it was the 80s after all, they probably had gangs of punk rockers lurking around every corner. So those in charge make the exceptionally logical decision to employ 3 high-tech security robots to keep things on the up and up. But when a pesky lightning storm hits and damages the control computer, the Protectors become the killbots and start taking out some pesky young people who are going about some pesky young people shenanigans in the mall after hours. And these are some of the coolest looking robots ever to grace the silver screen. So wonderfully 80s in design, they could have easily been any number of robot toys released at the time. And it was actually Wynorski's idea for the film to feature killer robots, his inspiration being Gog from 1954. And you can see it. The killbots definitely look like the sexier cousins of Gog and Magog. And yeah, I said sexy. And the robot effects came courtesy of special effects artist Robert Short and his team. Short, who also worked on Piranha, Splash, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, provided the original sketch that would go on to become the killbots. 5 were built in all, but only 2 were fully functional. One through remote control and the other through a cable connected to a control box. Their names were Remo and Rambo. The idea behind Rambo being wired was to get around potential radio interference. The other 3 were stunt bots that were pulled along with cables. As mentioned before, I've always found Chopping Mall to be a rather misleading title for the film. Turns out, it was originally called Killbots, which is far better. But after some poor test screenings, the film was cut down a bit and the title was changed. So it shows what I know, but as I've said before, you've really got to stop listening to me. Unless it's something donut related. That you can count on. And finally, the Killbots were voiced by none other than Jim Wynorski himself.
Do not make any sudden moves.
And now it's time for several honorable mentions. And the first, mention is Johnny Five from Short Circuit from 1986. I was surprised just how many people mentioned him when I did the first episode in this series. But Johnny Five is kind of like the hippie cousin to the Killbots from the aforementioned Chopping Mall. But a robot that doesn't want to blast anyone just can't be trusted in my book. Then we have Crichton from Red Dwarf, who is a great comedic sci-fi robot. He was actually going to be number 1 on the list, but stuff from the UK has gotten really tough to get away with here on YouTube. It's the same reason I haven't covered any Doctor Who yet. So at the last moment, I replaced Crichton with something else. And lastly, but not leastly, is a really interesting case of a robot from a movie that was never made. And that's Decapitron from 1989 by Empire Pictures. This was meant to be one of Empire's biggest releases yet, but the company went under before it got made. But that didn't stop them from advertising it. I saw an ad in a magazine featuring what would have been the movie poster, and that wonderful art just captured my young imagination something fierce. And being that Empire is one of my all-time favorite movie companies, I imagine it would have been all kinds of awesome. Decapitron didn't disappear completely though. The idea would be reused and he would appear in puppet form in Puppet Master 4 and 5, from which the footage you are seeing comes from. And number 1 on the list is Tik Tok from Return to Oz from 1985. Directed by Walter Murch, who is mostly an editor and sound designer, Return to Oz is a dark fantasy film mostly based on the novels The Marvelous Land of Oz and Ozma of Oz. And this unintentional source of nightmares for many tells the story of young Dorothy just 6 months after her first visit to Oz. Her aunt and uncle have decided to put her in a sanitarium thinking she has lost it. Of course, the place is creepy and weird and the doctor has less than noble intentions. Dorothy escapes and makes her way back to Oz somehow. And yet the Emerald City is in ruins and most of its citizens have been turned to stone. That is, except for the mechanical man Tik Tok. And here we have Dorothy's first companion in her adventure in darkness. Now, what can I really say about Tik Tok's design? He is awesome. Gold, which I really like, and he has a mustache. Now, as to the performance, Tik Tok was voiced by Sean Barrett, an actor who appeared in Four-Sided Triangle from 1953, and did voices for both The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. Then as the suit actor, we have Michael Sundin, an actor, acrobat, and trampoline expert. And the final piece of the Tik Tok puzzle was Timothy Rose, who controlled the head. Rose is an actor and puppeteer best known for his Oscar-winning portrayal of Admiral Akbar. He was also the puppeteer of Salacious Crumb. The character of Tik Tok made his first appearance in the 1907 novel Ozma of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Many consider our golden buddy here to be one of the first robots in fiction. As to whether or not that's actually the case, I really don't have a dog in this pony. I really wouldn't argue it either way. I just needed something to fill that Crichton void, and I wanted to talk about Tik Tok, so I did. And that's all the time we have this week, but before we go, I feel like I look pretty snazzy today. What do you think, Gregory?
You look like you got both eyes coming out of the same hole.
I have no idea what that means. Please like, comment, subscribe, watch the skies, and stay atomic.